Masechet Baba Kama Daf Chaf. We're in the middle of talking about the damage by shen, which means if an animal causes damage doing normal activity, eating is normal activity, and the animal also gets benefit from that, then that is the damage of shen, which one has to pay a full amount if it happens in Reshut HaNizak, and he's eating things that he normally eats, and the Reshut HaRabim, he pays nothing at all, because you should not be leaving your stuff, your food unguarded in Reshut HaRabim. If you do that, my animal comes and eats it. This is to be expected. My animal's allowed to roam around there, and therefore, normal behavior that my animal does in the Reshut HaRabim, I'm patur. Amar Ilfa, behema b'Reshut HaRabim, ufashta savara ve'achla me'al gabe chaverta chayevet, mai ta'ama gabe chaverta kachasar anizak dameh. Ilfa gives an important exception to this general rule. If my animal is in the public domain, and it sticks out its neck and eats from a sack of produce on the back of your animal, I have to pay, even though it's in the public domain. Why? Because the back of your animal is like your courtyard, you're the nizak, and therefore I am liable to pay. When we talk about the public domain, that's if you leave food right in the middle of public domain, then, what are you doing putting it there? You have to be more careful. So that's called a Reshut HaRabim. I have a right to go walk there. But if you're just, you have a sack, or your animal has a sack of food that it's carrying in the Reshut HaRabim, and my animal goes and stretches out its neck, right? Reaches into that sack, your animal and its sack are all your property. So that, therefore, it's equivalent to my animal going into your field and eating your food, so I am fully liable. Good. Lema mesaya le hayta kupato mufshelet achorav ufashta savara ve'achla mimenu hayevet. It seems that we can bring support for Ilfa from the following baraita, that if someone is standing in the middle of Reshut HaRabim and he has a sack behind his back with food in it, and my animal goes and stretches out his neck and eats from it, chayav. It seems to be exactly the same. Isn't that a good proof? And we say not necessarily. Kedama Rava bekofeset, hachaname bekofeset. Rava, regarding a slightly different case, said that it only applies when the animal is jumping. And here too, we can say that's only chayav when the animal is jumping. Jumping means that it jumps up on its back legs, and it lifts its forelegs up on top of another animal, and thereby it can get more height so that it can reach into the sack and eat from it. That is unusual activity. Once it's unusual activity, it goes into the category of keren. And keren in the Reshut HaRabim, I am liable. And so Rava, he said that a bit different case, but we could apply the same thing here. And we can say that this baraita is only talking about a case where my animal jumped on top of your animal with its forelegs and then started eating from it. Unusual activity, and that's why I am liable. But if it was doing normal activity and didn't jump up, maybe I would not be liable. So this is not necessarily a proof for Ilfa. Now, what was the original context of Rava's statement that we transferred it? Ahadamar Rabbi Oshaya, behema b'Reshut HaRabim, halcha ve'achla petura, amda ve'achla chayevet, ma'ishana halcha de'orchehu, amda name orchehu. It was for this statement of Rabbi Oshaya that said an animal that's in the public domain, my animal, let's say it's mine, and it goes and eats some grain out there, I am not liable. That's if it's walking. But if it's standing and eats your grain, then I'm liable. And now we ask, what's the difference between walking and standing? Walking is a normal way. Standing is also a normal way. Sometimes animals walk, sometimes they stand. So both of these are normal things, and therefore that should be shen in the Reshut HaRabim, and both should be patur. And Rava came to the rescue. Amar Rava bekofeset. No, when it says standing, it doesn't mean standing with all feet on the ground in a normal way, but rather it's not walking, but rather it's jumping, that it lifted up its two front legs on top of a next animal to eat from something that the animal was carrying, and that is unusual activity, and that explains over there why if it's walking, so that's normal, that's shen. If it's standing means jumping, then is liable, because then that goes into the category of keren. So Rava originally said it about this, but it could be that the previous baraita is also talking about jumping, as Rava might say about that one also, and therefore there's no proof, no disproof either for Ilfa's statement. Next question, Ba'er Rabbi Zera, mitgalgel mahu. What about rolling? Hechidame, what's the case of rolling? Kegon dekaima amir b'shut hayachid, v'kam mitgalgel ve'atem b'shut hayachid l'shut harabim mai. There's a sheaf of grain on your private property. My animal comes along and rolls it out to the public domain and then eats it in the public domain. What do we say about that? Should we follow the place where it was originally in the Shut HaYachid, and that would be Shen, and the Shut HaYachid, and that'd be liable? Or do we look at the where it is at the time of it being destroyed, being eaten, and it's being eaten in the Shut HaRabim, and that's a normal thing, Shen in the Shut HaRabim, and therefore I'd be patur, right? What do we do with something moving? Do we go by the origin place or the place where it is at the time of damage? Let's try to answer it. Tashema from a Braita. Detane Rabbi Chiya. Masoi miksato bifnim miksato bachutz. Achla bifnim hayebet. Achla bachutz petura. My lab mitgalgel ve'ate. This Braita in the name of Rabbi Chiya says that if there's some food, a load of food that's half inside your property and half outside, it's right on the borderline, and some of it is out in the Shut HaRabim. And it says, when the animal eats that which is inside, I am liable, that's the Shut HaYachid. That which it eats outside is Petura. Are we not talking about a case where the animal moved it? And therefore, if he moved the whole thing inside, then I would be liable. And if he moved the whole thing outside and ate it outside, I'd be patur. So according to this, we can derive that, in fact, we go by the time of the damage, where it was then. Is that a good proof? Well, not necessarily. La ema achla al ma shebifnim hayevet al ma shebachutz petura. No, maybe it means if it ate that, whatever it ate that had been inside, I am liable for, and whatever it eats from that which had been outside at the start, I'm patur. Meaning we go by where everything is at the start, and it doesn't really matter if he pushes it inside or drags it outside. Even if he drags the whole thing to the Shut HaRabim, we follow where it was originally. So this Baraita can be interpreted equally both ways, and therefore there is no proof, no answer to it. Or another interpretation of Rabbi Chiya that actually could be talking about a case of pulling something, but still would not be any proof for Rabbi Zera's question. Ki ka'amar Rabbi Chiya biftila de aspasta. Rabbi Chiya might be talking about a case of a long stalk of fodder. It's very long, and half of it is inside your property, and half of it is out in the Shut HaRabim. And so my animal is out in the Shut HaRabim and starts eating the part in the Shut HaRabim. And as it's eating, it pulls the rest with it. It could be that's the case that it's talking about, that if it's outside when it does all that, then patur, because since half of it was already outside and it's eating that, then the rest, which is connected, just drags along with it. In that case, patur. But that doesn't mean we can't learn from there to Rabbi Zera's case, where this sheaf was totally inside your property, and then my animal went and took it outside into the Shut HaRabim, where it wasn't part here, part there. In that case, it could very well be that we would say, wait, it was totally inside, you moved it out. No, it goes by inside, and I have to pay. That's a different case than this one that's already half out, but it's all connected, it's all one thing, where we say we follow wherever it is physically eating on the outside. There, okay, patur, because he started eating part on the outside and it's all connected, so fine, it goes on the outside. But that's different from where none of it was on the outside and he went in, brought it out. Maybe there he would be chayav, and so we end up without any absolute answer to this. Okay, achla kesu, to the next item in the Mishnah. We need to look at the structure of the Mishnah, remind ourselves to understand this question. The Mishnah brought first two cases and then a bamed amurim, and we want to know this qualification, limitation, which of the two cases is it going on, the first or both? The first one was about a regular case of an animal that is eating fruits and vegetables, what it normally eats, So that's called mu'ad, and if it's eating it in the Shut HaYachid, certainly would be liable, and Shut HaRabim not liable. That's normal eating. The second case is eating if the animal goes and chews on clothing or vessels. So then it says you have to pay half damage. This doesn't usually eat such a thing, so this is half damage. Now then it says, when is this true? Only if in the Shut HaNizak, but in Shut HaRabim Patur. So when we say Shut HaRabim Patur, for sure that's going on the first case, because that would be normal Shen, and the Shut HaRabim is Patur. But what about the second case, where it's eating something unusual, and it's doing it in the Shut HaRabim? So would we say that that would be under the category of goring, because my animal is doing an unusual activity? Animals don't usually eat clothing and vessels, so therefore it would be hayav, in fact, in that case. So the benedict is only going on the first. Or is it going on both? And if it's eating even this unusual food in the Shut HaRabim, still it would be patur totally, not even chatzi nezek. And we'll see the logic why that might be. So here we go. Achla kesut vechule, quoting the Mishnah, ahaya. This limitation, which of the previous clauses is it going on? Amarav akulhu, it's going on all the clauses, not only when it's eating normally, for sure, that's patur in the Shut HaRabim, but even eating abnormal food. Mai ta'ama kol ha'mishaneh uba acher v'shina bo patur. Here's Rav's reasoning. It's your clothing. You put your clothing in the middle of the street. That's unusual. That's mishaneh. So you deviated from the normal behavior, and therefore you're going to be responsible for damage that happens to it, right? Not my problem. Now, it happens to be that my animal came and also did something unusual and ate clothing. Nevertheless, since you did something unusual first, you deviated from the norm, and you put yourself in danger, even though my animal also also did something unusual, and so really it should be keden from my perspective, but keden only applies when only my animal deviates from the norm, right? Keden applies when your animal is walking normally, and my animal comes and gores it. So then, that's unusual. The Shut HaRabim, I have to pay half for tam, or full amount for mu'ad. But if you first do something unusual and put your clothing in the middle of the street, and then my animal comes and also does something unusual, I am not liable. You did the unusual thing first. That is Rav's opinion. Ushmuel Amar lo shanu ela perot virakot aval kesut vechelim hayebet. Shmuel says no. The Medinat limitation in Mishnah is only going on normal shen, eating fruits and vegetables, because shen applies in the Shut HaYachid, the Shut HaNizak, but not in the Shut HaRabim. Right? But if my animal goes and eats clothing, well, that's goring. That's unusual for an animal to eat goring. And it doesn't matter that you did something unusual in leaving clothing in the middle of the street. It makes no difference. My animal did something unusual, ate something, and that's called goring, and therefore I am liable in the Shut HaRabim. Okay, so now we see the two Babylonian first generation Amoraim, Rav and Shemuel, argue with each other, and now we're going to see that the two Eretz Yisrael early Amoraim also argue with each other. V'chen amar Shakish kulehu akulehu. Shakish agrees with Rav that the limitation is on both, and therefore you did something unusual. And then I did something. My animal did something unusual. I am patur. Vaz Resh Lakish l'tameh. Resh Lakish applies the same reasoning in another case, not with clothing, but with two animals. Damar Resh Lakish sheteh parot b'shut harabim. Achat rebusa ve'achat mehalechet. Be'ata mehalechet b'rebusa petura. Rebusa be'mehalechet chayevet. Look at the scenario. There's two cows in the street. Mine is prone, it's lying down, and yours is walking. And now, so yours, the one that's walking, kicks mine. Patur. Why? It's normal to walk in a Shut HaRabim. It's unusual for an animal to be crouching in the Shut HaRabim. It's like a person lying down in the middle of the sidewalk, right? And someone steps on them, didn't see them. Why are you lying down in the middle of the sidewalk, right? You're not supposed to be doing that. So if my animal is crouching in the middle of a sidewalk, it first is doing something unusual and wrong. Now, when your animal comes and kicks it, which is also unusual activity, you're patur because I'm the one that did something unusual first. However, if you switch them and my animal that was crouching sticks out its leg and kicks your animal that's walking, then I'm liable. That's a regular case of goring. Your animal is doing a normal activity. My animal is kicking, which is unusual. So there I am liable. So you see the same principle applies. Resh Lakish applies it in the case of two animals, and not only regarding the eating food. Rabbi Yochanan seems to agree with Shemuel that the limitation that the Reshut Harabim is patur is only regarding fruits and vegetables, where that's normal shen, is Reshut Harabim patur. But if it's an unusual case of eating clothing, well, you did something unusual by leaving your clothing there in the first place, so therefore I am liable. Now, it would seem from here that Rabbi Yochanan would disagree with Resh Lakish regarding the two cases of the animals, because he would say that just like Kisut and Kelim is unusual, and if you did it first, I am liable, so too he would say, although it's your animal being prone, in that case, it was my animal being prone. So my animal being prone is unusual. Nevertheless, your animal kicking it is also unusual. So therefore, it should be goring, and it would be chayav. So he would say chayav in both ways. Even if the one that was walking hits the one that was prone, would also be chayav. It seems, right, logically, that he would disagree with Resh Lakish. But then we say, Lema Rabbi Yochanan, right. Lo, and then we say, no, not necessarily. It could be that Rabbi Yochanan would agree with the opinion of Resh Lakish. Why? Leolam itle kesut abdi inashe de manche gelime umit peche aval behema lav orche. There is actually a difference between clothing and animals. Regarding clothing, sometimes people leave clothing to rest on. They put it in the street, and they need to sit down for a while and rest for a while, and they put the clothing down the street, and then they get up. The clothing is still there. They didn't get a chance to pick it up yet. That's a normal thing to do, to use a Reshut Harabim for. Therefore, if you leave clothing in the Reshut Harabim, that's a normal thing to do. If my animal comes and eats the clothing, that's an unusual thing for my animal to do. That's a typical case of goring, in which I would have to pay half if mine is a shor tam. That's not the same as an animal where it's unusual for an animal to be lying down in the public domain. And therefore, if your animal is lying down in the public domain, you did something unusual first. My animal comes and kicks it, which is also unusual, but I am patur because you started. You did the first unusual thing. And therefore, according in this reading, Rabbi Yochanan essentially agrees with the logic, not of Shemuel, but rather of Rav, that if you do something unusual first, and then my animal does something unusual, so then I am patur. And that would apply to the animal, as Shakish said. The only disagreement is putting clothing in the Reshut Harabim a normal activity or not? Rav thought it was abnormal activity, and therefore my animal that comes and does it is the second one that does something abnormal, and therefore it's patur. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan thought that putting clothing in Reshut Harabim is normal activity, and therefore my animal coming and eating it, that's unusual, and therefore I would have to pay in the Reshut Harabim because that falls under keren. The next part of the Mishnah says, V'im neheneh meshalemet, if my animal goes and eats some of your produce, I have to pay. This is in public domain. Even though I don't have to pay damages because it's in public domain, I still have to pay what the amount that my animal benefited from it. Kama, how much? How do we evaluate that? Rabba Amar Deme Amir. Rabba Amar Deme Seorim Bezol. So Rabba says we pay for the amount of stalks of hay. Even if my animal went and ate your very fine, fancy food that cost a lot of money, but the animal didn't really care about the expensive food that you got with from the expert chef gourmet food for humans. My animal only didn't care about that. It only benefited a certain amount of calories, but I could have fed it stalks of hay or straw at the same. So I evaluate the same amount of weight food, of calories, in terms of straw, which would be going to be much cheaper. Rava says, no, not straw, but rather barley, which is more of a typical, both are typical animal foods. Straw seems to be cheaper. Barley can be more expensive, but Rava says it's the barley at the cheapest price that's available in the market, not wherever you might find it in a local store. You find the cheapest value, because I could have gone and found it at the cheapest value, and I pay that. So that's the machloket. Do you go by the value of a straw or by the value of barley? Tanya kivate de Rabba, Tanya kivate de Rava. We have a baraita that supports both. Tanya kivate de Rava, de Rabba, de Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Amar, en mishalemet ela de me amir bilbad. As here, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says that you pay the value of straw. That's what Rabba said. Tanya kivate de Rava, im nehenit mishalemet ma shenenit. Kesad, achla kab o kabayim en omdim tishalem de mehen, ela omdim kama adam rosel achil behemto davar ra'oi la, af al pi she'eno ragil. Lefichach achil achitin o davar hara la petura. This Tosefta says, if my animal ate a calfful or 2 calves of grain that's more expensive, we don't say they have to pay the value of that grain, but rather we estimate how much would a person pay in order to feed his animal something that it can eat, even if it doesn't usually eat, but it can eat. Like my animal doesn't usually eat barley, but sometimes it does. It could eat barley if it wanted. So then we go and look for the barley, which is the cheapest food and at its cheapest price, and that's what we give it. So that would support Rava. Because this would include whatever, even if the animal doesn't normally eat it, but barley is cheaper, so we can follow that amount. Therefore, this is only if it's going to be beneficial. Whatever it ate is beneficial for the animal. So if it ate some of your more expensive barley grain, I only have to pay you with a less expensive barley grain. Therefore, if my animal went and ate wheat, and wheat is not good for animals, they don't like wheat, it's detrimental, it didn't actually get any benefit, it's just going to get a stomach ache from that, and so I don't have to pay anything at all, because this is eating, it's shen in the Shut Harabim, so I'm not liable to damages at all. And even for the benefit, well, if my animal didn't get benefit because your food was not fitting for it to eat and didn't get it fuller and healthier, then I don't have to pay anything at all. We now begin a long sugya discussion about ze nehene veze lo chaser. Amar le Rav Chisda le Rami bar Chama. Rav Chisda tells Rami bar Chama. Rami bar Chama is Rav Chisda's student and son-in-law. That's going to be important. La havet kaban beorta betchuma de bayalan mile ma'aliyata. Rav Chisda says, you were not with us at night within the boundary. This probably is talking about that after Shabbat. And he says, yesterday on Shabbat, you were not with us in the Tchum Shabbat, so you weren't at the study session that we have. It's a shame because you missed. We had an amazing question, a dilemma that we raised and we were discussing. It was fantastic. You missed it. Amar ma'imile ma'aliyata. So Rami bar Chama says, what was the exceptional, fantastic matter that you were discussing? Rav Chisda says, Amar le hadar b'chasar habero shelo midato sarich lahalot lo sachar o en sarich. Let's say I am squatting in your courtyard and without your permission. Do I have to pay you for the time that I squatted there, or I don't have to pay? Now, before we answer the question or bring proofs, let's first clarify what were the circumstances. Hechidameh. If we're talking about a courtyard that's not open for rental, right? You're not renting out that courtyard. It was going to just be empty anyway. And I am someone who I was not going to rent. I have another place to stay. I didn't need this place to stay, but it was just, happened to be there. In that case, this would fall under this person gets no benefit. I mean, that's me. I'm squatting there, but I get no monetary benefit because I wouldn't have to pay if I wasn't staying there. I have another place to live. And you are not losing out because if I wasn't there, you weren't going to rent it out to anybody else anyway. I didn't take up another rental. And therefore, for sure, I do not have to pay. There's no reason why I would have to pay in such a case because I get no monetary benefit. You have no monetary loss. And so that can't be there's no dilemma there. Ela bechaser dekaimad leagra vegabra de'abid lemegad ze nehene v'ze chaser. If it's the opposite, where this is a courtyard that you are renting out, right? And you're looking for a renter. And I also am looking. I need a place to stay. I don't have any other place, and I would pay rent. And now I just go and squat in your courtyard, and therefore you're not able to collect rent from anybody else because I took the spot. In that case, that would be a case of I am benefiting and you are losing out, right? If I go and steal a hotel room where the hotel is full and they have to turn away another customer, and I also had no other place to stay, so then of course I have to pay for it. So that can't be the case either. Rather, it has to be an in-between case. Rather, we're supposed to be talking about a courtyard that is not meant to be rented out, but I, the squatter, need a place to stay and would have to pay if I wasn't staying at your place. So in this case, this is zenehene, I am benefiting, but you are not losing out anything. This would be like if I go and sneak into an empty hotel room. The hotel is mostly empty. There are a lot of rooms. They weren't going to rent it out anyway. I sneak in and I sleep there in a foreign city where I have no other place to stay. So I would have to pay for it. So therefore, in that sense, I should pay. On the other hand, you weren't going to get anything. You weren't going to get any money anyway. So maybe I shouldn't have to pay. What do we say about that? Here's the two sides. I could say, I didn't cause you any loss, so I slept in your courtyard. You weren't going to rent it out anyway. Or maybe you, the owner of the courtyard, can say, but you benefited. You didn't have to go and rent another room. You were able to get it for free, so therefore you should have to pay me for sleeping there. All right, that's the two sides. That's the case we're talking about, and it's not clear what the answer is. So after Rav Chisda told him that this is what we were discussing, Amar le matnitinhi. Bar Chama says, "What? That's a dilemma? That's easy. It's an explicit Mishnah, and everybody expected to know a Mishnah." Hey matnitin. Now, what's the Mishnah? Rav Chisda asked. What Mishnah are you thinking of? And Rami Bar Chama says something a little bit disrespectful, seems. Amar le lechi teshamesh li. I'll tell you when you serve me. Now, to serve someone, students back then would not only learn from their teachers, but they would also serve the teachers personally. They would carry their bags and put on their shoes and do things for the teacher. That was part of the apprentice-student relationship. So Rav Chisda, the student here and son-in-law, is telling his father-in-law and teacher, why don't you serve me, and then I'll tell you. It seems like it's disrespectful. Rabbi Bar Chama was known to sometimes kind of cross the line in a humorous way, and give cases that are out of the box, theoretical cases, so he could be entertaining. So I think he means this in a humorous way, telling his father-in-law, "Oh, you want to know what I have to say, right? Usually, you're my father-in-law, and you're my teacher, but I have a chidush. Maybe you should serve me." So they did this in a playful way, I think. Shikal sudre kerach le, and so Rav Chisda took Rami Bar Chama's scarf and wrapped it around him, in a way that would normally a student would serve a teacher. And so now he says, okay, now I'll tell you. Amar le, im nehenet meshalemet ma shenehenet. It's from our Mishnah over here that says that if my animal goes and eats from your produce in the Shut Harabim, I don't have to pay damages because it's in the Shut Harabim, but I do have to pay what I benefited. Now, this is a case of Ze nehene veze lo chaser. My animal benefited, even though I don't have to pay for your loss. There's not enough to pay for damages. And you see here that I do have to pay for what my animal benefited from, even though you had no loss. So technically you did have a loss. We're going to ask that in a second. But the point, I think, is that I don't have to pay for your loss because it's in the Shut Harabim. And so even though my animal benefited, and I have to pay, and therefore, in the case so here also where I squatted on your land, I should have to pay for my time there of rental value, even though you weren't going to rent it out anyway. Amar Rava. Now Rava is a fellow student of Rav Chisda, an often rival of Rami Bar Chama. In fact, they both had a rivalry over who would marry Rav Chisda's daughter. And in fact, they do marry. They both marry her one after the other one dies. And so Rava, also his eventual son-in-law and student, says about Rami Bar Chama, Kama la hale vela margish kabra de mare saya'e, daf agav de la dame lematnitin kibela mine. This is a sharp line. He says, so look how someone who mare saya'e, his master protects him, meaning someone who has assistance from Hashem, doesn't have to worry or be concerned. In other words, Rami Bar Chama, really, he got divine help here, but he didn't actually deserve it, because Rav Chisda accepted his answer from the Mishnah, even though the Mishnah is not the same as the case he's trying to prove. And so really, Rav Chisda should not have accepted it, and he got just divine favor. That's what got him in, right? That's what got him into this prestigious program. He had divine help. He didn't deserve it. Okay, and so why is it not the same? Hai ze nehene veze chaser, v'hai ze nehene veze lo chaser. The case in our Mishnah is my animal benefited because it ate, and you lost out because my animal ate some of your produce, and now that produce is gone and ruined. So, in fact, of course I have to pay where I destroyed some of your produce. Whereas the case that we're talking about is I benefit from squatting, and you lose nothing because it's just a courtyard. It was empty anyway, and you did not. There's no damages. There's no loss at all. So the two cases are not similar, and Rami Bar Chama should not have made such a comparison, and Rav Chisda should definitely not have accepted it. So now we ask for Rami Bar Chama. This is a good point. What was Rami Bar Chama thinking? And the answer is Setam perot b'shut harabim afkodem afkar lehu. If you put this produce in the middle of the street, then that means you're making it ownerless. If you put it there, that means anyone can come and take it. Therefore, since it's not yours, you don't own it. I don't have to pay you for it. And so I don't cause you a loss by taking it. Now, it happens to be that, it is, you come back and, it's like, hey, what happened to my produce? I put it here. So even though it's considered ownerless to the extent that you can't say that I caused you a loss. I caused ownerless fruit a loss. So it's not yours. But nevertheless, I still do have to pay you because it's not as damages, but since my animal did benefit, so I should have to pay. And who am I going to pay? Well, it was yours, and then you came back for it, so it wasn't truly ownerless, therefore I have to pay you. So therefore Rami Bar Chama says it is equivalent, and that's why he made the comparison, and presumably that's why Rav Chisda accepted it. Okay, so that was one attempt to answer the question. And now we're going to have a second attempt. Tenan, Mishnah in Baba Batra. Hamakif havero mishelosh ruchotav vegadar et harishona ve'et hasheniya ve'et hashelishit. En mechayevin oto, ha-rebi'it mechayevin oto. Okay, we're talking about a case where I have a field in the middle. Let's say this is my field over here. This block of text is my field. And you have a field on three sides. You own this side, and this side, and this side. And you go ahead and you build a fence on three of the sides because you want to protect your fence from any animals or thieves or me coming in. And so you build a fence on three sides. And then you come and say, wait, can you share the cost of the fence? So I could say no, because I really got no benefit since my field is still exposed on the fourth side. So animals and thieves can still come in. So therefore, I have your fence does not benefit me at all. Now we can infer from this Mishnah that if I build something on the fourth side, then I would have to pay you for the other three sides because now I am benefiting. We can derive from this that if I benefit, even though you didn't lose anything out, I have to pay. You didn't lose anything because you were going to pay for it anyway. You were paying for the fence for yourself. So that's why you put it on three sides. So you have no loss. But now if I benefit if I make a fourth side, and then I do benefit from the other three sides, then I have to pay. So isn't this good proof? And we say, no, not necessarily. In that case, you, on the outside, can say that I caused you to have to build a bigger wall by having my field in the middle. If my field wasn't here, then instead of building this long C-shaped wall, you could have simply built a wall over here, and that would have protected all of your land. Right? Imagine, you have to build a wall that is like a C shape that's outline of a C. Right? You have to build all the way around here. And into here and like that. So you have to go in and carve out a space for my land. But if my land wasn't here, then you could just build a straight wall. And so, in fact, this is a case of ze nene veze chaser. My field caused you to have to pay extra to build a longer wall, and I also benefit. I certainly should have to pay, but we can't use this as a proof for lo chaser. Okay, that didn't work, so let's try a third possibility from the continuation of that very Mishnah, Tashema. Amad Rabbi Yosef, im amad nikaf vegadad et harevi'it megalgalin alav et hakol. Tamad gadad nikaf ha-makif patur. Rabbi Yosef says, if the nikaf, the one that's inside, went and built the fourth wall, then he has to pay for all of them because he's benefiting. We can derive from here that's only because the inside guy made it. But let's say you, the outside guy, you made all three walls and you built the fourth wall also, then I don't have to, even though I'm certainly benefiting now, because now all four of mine are enclosed, right? This would be a case, let's say, that you own the fields on all four sides of mine. So that in that case, since you built, you want to protect, you did it for yourself. You built on all four sides, but I for sure benefit because now mine is totally enclosed. And still, it says patur because you did it for yourself. So from here we can derive that ze nene veze lo chaser patur. Shema min hazeh nevzeh l'chaser patur. Is that a good proof? We say not necessarily. Shane hatam damar le ledidi sagili benetira barzuta. I, in the inside, can say, listen, you know what? I would have been fine with a very cheap wall. You went and built a nice big brick wall, made it high and strong, and you spent a lot on it. But you know what? For me, just a little wire fence would have been sufficient just as a deterrent for animals, and that would have been totally fine. So therefore, I'm not going to pay you a lot. I'll pay you a few cents for that. That's because that's what I would have built, and therefore I can claim that I'm not I could claim about the expense. Right? It's true. Okay, fine. I'll pay something, but I don't have to pay the amount that you spent on it, and maybe that's why I don't have to pay. But it's not necessarily a proof that in a different case where it will be a standard benefit, that it would be patur. Maybe in a different case, I would actually have to pay. We next attempt yet another resolution to the dilemma from a Mishnah in Baba Metziat Hashema. Habayit v'ha'aliyah shel shenayim shenaflu. Amar Baal Haliyah leBaal Habayit libnot, v'hu eno oseh. Hareh Baal Haliyah boneh bayit v'yoshev ba ad she'yiten lo yesiotav. You have a two-story house, and one person lives in the upper story and one person on the lower story. The house entirely falls down. The guy in the upper story tells the one below, hey, let's rebuild the house. But the one below doesn't want to. He has somewhere else to live, and so he doesn't want to spend the money to rebuild his floor. But now the guy on top is stuck because he can't build a second floor unless there's a first floor there. So the guy upstairs has a right to go ahead and build one floor for whatever that cost is. Let's say $100,000 to build the first floor, and he can even live there. And he doesn't have to build the second floor. He can live there until the guy who owned the first floor comes and gives him the $100,000. And then at that point, the guy who owns the second floor can take that $100,000, and then he can build his second floor. But in the meantime, the guy upstairs can live on the main floor for free. So, Yisi otav hu de mechayev le Baal Habayit ha-secharo la shma mina ze nenev ze lo chaser patur. We see that the owner of the downstairs only has to pay the amount of the building cost, $100,000, and then the guy upstairs can live on the first floor for free, and he does not have to pay rent. What can we derive from here? That this upstairs guy who's living downstairs is benefiting by living in the downstairs apartment. The guy who owns the downstairs apartment is not losing out anything because he has somewhere else to live. He doesn't care to rebuild it, so he's not losing out, and the upstairs guy who's living downstairs does not have to pay rent. So we can derive that in general. Is that a good proof? We say no. In this case, the upper story depends on the lower story, and therefore the upper guy has a claim, and his claim is, you need to build the lower story so that I can build the upper story. If you live below me, you can't just go destroy your house because you want to do a new renovation and leave me hanging, literally, right? You have an obligation to keep your story there so that my upper story, would be there. And so therefore I have a claim against you, a counterclaim. And so therefore the two claims cancel each other out and say, listen, I'm gonna live here rent free until you go ahead and pay me for the first story, the building of the first story, and then I won't. But in the meantime, I don't owe you because you owe me a first story so that I can build a second story. And so there's no proof from here as a unique case. Okay, let's try again. Tashema. This is from the continuation of that very, very baraita. We have a minority opinion that is a machloket. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, af ze hadar b'chasar chavero shelo mida'ato tzarich la'alot lo sachar. The very same case. And Rabbi Yehuda says that the upper story guy who's living in the ground floor has to pay because he is living there without the agreement or knowledge or an agreement of the guy downstairs, and therefore he has to pay in the meantime. So we can now derive actually the opposite, according to the Yehuda at least, that if the upper guy is using the ground floor apartment, even though the owner of the ground floor does not lose anything because he doesn't care to build it, he has somewhere else to live, and so he's not losing out anything. And nevertheless, the guy who owns upstairs has to pay rent. So you see that chayav, and we say that's also not a good proof. Shaneata mishum shacharurita de ashyata. He has to pay rent because of the blackening of the walls, meaning the use of it as he lives there, and he has he uses a candle or makes fire. Eventually the walls become black, then the house depreciates in the meantime. So while the guy upstairs spent $100,000 to build the first floor, and in the meantime he's living there, but it still depreciates, and so after a year or two goes by, now it's going to be worth less. So he has to pay rent to make up for that amount, and eventually, if the first floor owner comes around and he pays $100,000, so now he's paying $100,000 for something that's only worth $90,000, and the upstairs guy will now be able to build himself a brand new apartment with the new money, and so that is in fact a benefit and to the upstairs guy, and there is a loss to the downstairs guy, and so this is a case of zene neveze chaser, and that's why he has to pay. So there's no proof from here for zene neveze lo chaser. All right, so that ends the attempted proofs. We don't have a definitive proof either way, but the discussions continues. Shalchu be Rabbi Ameh. So students asked Rabbi Ameh what he thinks. Amar v'chi me asalo uma chisero uma ziko. He says zenevze lo chaser patur because the squatter, what did he do? What did he cause a loss? What was the damage? Like, what are you going to pay? I went and I squatted in your courtyard. What claim can you have against me? Right? What did you lose out? Right? How much are you going to charge me for something that you have no loss for? Therefore, it makes no sense to make him pay. Good question. Rabbi Chiya bar Abba Amar nitjashe b'daba. They asked the same question to Rabbi Chiya bar Abba, and he says, I have to think about it. Hadar shelachu hakamed Rabbi Chiya bar Abba Amar kol hai shalchu li ve'azli ilu ashkachi ba'ta'ama la shelachna lehu. So they asked him again, sometime later, so what do you think? And he said, "Oh, why do you keep sending me the same question? If I would have found a response, I would have told you what I thought. I'm still thinking about it. I don't know. I don't have an answer for you." Itmar. Rav Kahana Amar Rabbi Yochanan eno sarich lalot lo sachar. Amar Rabbi Abhu Amar Rabbi Yochanan sarich lalot lo sachar. And now we see it's a machloket between two students of Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Kahana quoted in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that if I squat on your courtyard and you don't lose anything out, and I benefit, I do not have to pay. And Rabbi Abu, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, says you do have to pay. Now, Rabbi Yochanan seemingly could only have said one of these two things. So, which one is the real Rabbi Yochanan? Amar Papa had Rabbi Abu la beferush itamar ela mikalalad itamar. The Papa explains that the tradition in the name of Rabbi Abu was not said. He didn't hear it explicitly from Rabbi Yochanan, but he only inferred it from the following story. In other words, Rav Kahana is the true opinion, tradition of Rabbi Yochanan. He heard that explicitly. He does not have to pay. And this halacha that Zeneh Nevezolacha said hayav, that Rabbi Abu said, Rabbi Yochanan didn't actually say it explicitly. Rabbi Abu derived it, but he inferred it wrongly. Ditnan. Natal eben o korash elekdesh hare ze lo ma'al. This is a Mishnah in Masechet Me'ilah. You have the temple treasurer. He has all kinds of things that people donate to the Beit HaMikdash, and he has to take care of them. And maybe he's taking care of them, and he's storing them in his house, in his backyard, wherever. And so the temple treasurer takes a stone or a beam. Now, if he takes it, he's carrying it around, that he does not violate Me'ilah because he's the temple treasurer, and maybe he needs to move it somewhere. This is like a bank teller who's moving around the bank's money. He's not stealing because that's his job, is to move these things around. But if the temple treasurer then gives it to someone as a gift, well, now he's transferring the ownership, and clearly that is beyond his right as a treasurer. He's now getting personal benefit, and that would be me'ilah. If the temple treasurer went and took a beam and put it into his house, meaning built it into his house, that's not me'ilah yet, just by building it there, until he goes and lives in the house, even for just 1 minute, and gets a piruta's worth of benefit from that beam, then he is chayav me'ilah. But before that, since he got no benefit, you can't say that he is committed me'ilah. That's the Mishnah. Shemuel says this leniency here, that he's only liable until he actually lives in it for a little, only applies when he took the beam and used it to cover a skylight, in which case he did not change the beam at all. It's just sitting there and is not devalued. However, if he took the beam and actually built it into the house, nailed it in, welded it into the house, then he's already using it, making a change in it, and acquiring it thereby. That would be equivalent of giving it to his friend. And even if he didn't yet live in the house and benefit, he would have to pay. It would be me'ilah. Okay, that's the background. V'yatib Rabbi Abhu kamed Rabbi Yochanan v'kamar mishmed Shmuel zot omeret hadar b'chasar chavero shelo mida'ato sarich la'alot lo sachar ushtak leh. Now, Rabbi Abhu had been sitting before Rabbi Yochanan, right, as teacher to student, and he said this in the name of Shemuel, right, this halacha that Shemuel commented on the Mishnah, and Rabbi Abhu said, it seems to me I can derive from here that if I live in your courtyard without your permission, I have to pay money. All right, what's the connection? As follows: as if this temple treasurer takes a beam and puts it up on the on the roof. At that point, he didn't change it at all. He's not detracting from the value of the beam. And if in fact tomorrow he could just take the beam and then and bring it to the Bet HaMikdash for them to use, or sell it on behalf of the Bet HaMikdash. So he didn't detract from the value. So this is eno chaser. The Bet HaMikdash is not lacking anything. And here, just by putting it there, he does not violate. But once he goes and lives there, worth for a few minutes, worth a shaveh peruta, then that is called a monetary gain that he is stealing, and therefore is convicted of me'ilah. So the equivalent of that for ben adam lachavero would be that if I am benefiting from you and you are not losing anything, I have to pay. Just like the temple treasurer is chayav me'ilah, and you only chayav me'ilah unless you have some monetary benefit, and then you're liable. So too, if I squat in your courtyard, I have to pay you, even though you don't lose anything. Okay, it seems like a pretty interesting proof. And Rabbi Yochanan was sitting there, and Rabbi Yochanan didn't say anything. He didn't object. And now Rabbi Abu was sitting there. Says, "Oh, see, Rabbi Yochanan was sitting there. I proposed this thing, and he didn't object. So it must be that he agrees." But in fact, Rabbi Yochanan was not paying attention to what Rabbi Abu was saying. He was thinking about something else entirely, and that's why he was quiet. He didn't actually agree. And so this was a miscommunication. Now, why would he disagree? Why would anyone disagree? It seems like it's a good proof. The answer is kedrabad amar Rabba hekdesh shelo midat kehedyot midat dameh. When anything that's hekdesh without the treasurer's knowledge or the temple's knowledge, it doesn't matter. Hashem knows everything, and so you can't say that, he didn't know and did not object. Right? Hashem knows everything, and therefore we have to assume that the Hashem would object. This is a built-in that you can't take anything from Hekdesh. And if you do, even if nobody's objecting, still this goes against the law, and you have to pay. And that would be therefore the same as hejot mida'at dameh, an ordinary person who does something with the owner's knowledge and against his wishes. Right? In other words, if I go into your courtyard and I'm sleeping there, and you are protesting, right? You have a sign, get out of my house, and you're yelling, get out of here, you're not allowed to be here. In that case, certainly you have to pay, because that you know about. The case that we're questioning is when you are not aware of it, or you didn't say anything, and so I didn't know that you would protest. That case, that's still left open, and we don't have a proof from here. So it could very well be that when it comes to Hekdesh, the protest is assumed, right? Hashem knows everything, and it's not allowed. No one can ever do that. And so the temple treasurer that went in and used the house, that's called midat, and it was a protest, and he is liable. Right, if Rabbi Yochanan had heard about it, he would have protested to the comparison, because the comparison is to a case where the owner of the courtyard does not protest and doesn't even know about it, or knows about it and doesn't protest. And that's still an open question. If I go in and sleep there, it could very well be that I do not have to pay because you didn't say anything. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.